Hello everyone, so welcome to this video which I've made as a one-stop guide for how to prepare for a software engineering interview. And this is a guide that you can use across any level of software engineering and you know narrow it down to your specific needs. So basically, why did I decide to do this video? It's because someone posted a comment on one of my videos asking for he's looking to get a job, and he wants to know just a general walkthrough of the process of different companies, and how he should approach preparing for these interviews, right? So I decided that this is actually a good topic, something I wish I knew when I was earlier on in my career, so I decided to make this video. And so, why should you listen to me? Well, first of all, you don't really have to, so if you don't want to. But I have more than 8 years of experience as a software engineer. I've been at Amazon for over 5 years. I'm a senior software engineer there. I have personally conducted over 100 interviews across all levels from junior to mid level to senior people. I have prepared for interviews myself when I've interviewed at different companies, and I've also mentored a few people for preparing for interviews, and they actually ended up getting offers. So I think I have some good information to share across all this experience. And so, what to expect from this video exactly? So, I'll give you a template on just how to approach software engineering interview preparation, right? What are the different things you should look out for, things you should narrow down on, things maybe you don't need to dwell on as much. And you learn all the things you need to cover as part of your preparation, things that you don't know, right? And information that you should ask your recruiter or your prospective employer before an interview, right? So that helps you prepare better for the interview. And obviously, this is applicable across all levels of software engineering, from junior to mid level and to even more senior levels. And this is not a lesson or tutorial on technical topics. So if you expect to learn about linked lists or about you know deep technical knowledge about some of these topics, this is not what this video is for. This video is giving you a template or guide on how you can structure your approach to preparing for an interview. So, think of it that way. So let's get right into it, like without any further ado. So, step one is you should get the lay of the land, right? So, we have all these different competencies where we have, usually the first bucket of things is coding, right? So, in this bucket, usually it'll be a mix of data structures and algorithms, problem solving, logical and maintainable code, or maybe some technology specific like coding questions, right? And we'll get into these in more detail as we go along, but in general, no matter what level you're interviewing in, coding is usually going to be always something that companies interview for. And obviously, they might not interview for all of these four things depending on the company you're going to, but this is generally um, the major themes that coding interviews consist of. And, depending on the specific company you're going for, you can narrow it down. The next theme is design, right? So, whether you are a junior engineer, mid-level engineer, or senior engineer, there's always some sort of design. Like for someone who's very junior, he'll have to think about how to structure his classes, his functions, his objects. But then as you become more senior, you'll have to design bigger systems, maybe an API or a service, or maybe even a broader, product architecture. So we'll go through the different types of design interviews that I've seen and how to approach them. And finally, if you're a software engineer, you'll be working in a corporate, you'll be working with other people, and you'll probably be leading other people as well. So, the third bucket of interview types of interview questions that happen is more of behavior and leadership. And Here they want us to check your like work ethic, your scope and influence across different teams, how you handle like ambiguity, how you navigate, difficult problems, resolve conflicts with your coworkers, and where you have opinions that you don't necessarily agree on, and things like that. So we'll go about how to prepare for these, and some common tips for that as well. Yeah, so let's now just dive into the first bucket, which is the coding bucket, right? So the first part of the coding bucket is data structures and algorithms. And here I've listed down some common data structures and algorithms and techniques that usually you'd need to master in coding interviews, right? So we have like arrays, strings, hash maps, all these things I've listed here. Algorithms are usually like things that um, you do on top of data structures, right? So you're searching in an array, you're doing a binary search in an array, right? You're doing a DFS or a BFS on a graph. You could be doing tree traversals, obviously, on a tree, and so on, right? So, um, and then you have some basic techniques, right? So usually for solving problems, we have techniques like two pointer solutions, getting a prefix sum, maintaining sliding window, doing recursion, dynamic programming. So yeah, just pause this video, get a list, get all of these topics in your list, and make sure you kind of master them. And you don't need to go through like each and every one if you already have some knowledge, right? Just make sure you are well versed with each of these, right? And depending on where you are in your journey, um, you may have to prepare less or more. And I'll in the coming two slides, I'll tell you how you can approach preparing for these individual topics. But before that, let's once this is the basic ones, let's take a look at the advanced ones, right? So for advanced data structures, you have like segment trees, binary index trees, minimum spanning trees, algorithms like union find, quick select. These are very advanced, and the reason I've listed them here is like if you see something like this and you don't know it, don't freak out, because this is not something that is expected in interviews. And I haven't seen a single question asked that like consists of these as data structures or algorithms, right? So these are very advanced. If you want to study them for curiosity or learning, or just to be like one step ahead, sure, you can go for them, but just keep in mind that don't feel like you're dumb if you can't answer a binary index tree question or a segment tree question. It's not expected in an interview, so just keep these in mind. So now next, as I promised, let me tell you like how you have that huge list, right? So how should you approach it? So what I would recommend is usually master the skill, right? So for each data structure, read a book or a complete course on that chapter or on that data structure. This should be data structure, but yeah, like really understand its applicability, right? So this is very important. Like make sure you understand when to use it and what problem it solves, not just what it is. Because in the real world, what will happen is you'll be given a problem, and you need to know that this problem uses this data structure or this algorithm. So really understand when it's applicable, like what exactly problem it's solving, not just what the data structure is, right? And once you have a good understanding of the data structure, and you don't need to read an entire book, just one chapter, just an article that really, or a video that really breaks down what this data structure is, and so on, right? And maybe I'll make some videos on this. I don't know. If I do, I'll link it um, in the suggested video in the future. But for now, there are many other resources on each of these topics, and find a good resource, go deep, and understand what, like all these aspects of it. And then once you have a good theoretical understanding of the data structure, try to go on lead code and do some of the questions, right? So lead code has tags, and usually each of those topics I listed has a tag on lead code. So just go to lead code, filter the questions by that tag. So for example, if you're doing DFS, filter out DFS questions, right? And start with easy questions. Don't go all in, right? Start with easy questions, get warmed up, right? Because easy questions usually are like, okay, do you know the very basics of this like data structure algorithm, right? So it'll just prime you in like writing, a basic DFS or a basic BFS, right? And then you go on to medium questions, which is a bit more challenging, a bit more twist to it, a bit more edge cases to think about, and maybe some like problem solving where you need to translate the problem to the data structure. So then you can go with medium, and then after that you can try hard questions where you'll really master that skill, right? And usually in interviews you don't get hard questions, you usually get somewhere about medium to high upper medium, but I recommend just doing one or two hard questions just so you're like you really master it so that you can do medium questions with ease, right? So yeah, you won't actually get hard questions in interviews, but um, just try to know how to do at least one or two, because that will make you really a master at the skill. So with that out of the way, now like if you are an experienced engineer, you don't need to read a book on each of those topics, right? Because linked list, you must have mastered it by now, or maybe arrays, you already know what it is. So you know sometimes you might need a refresher, but like just use your judgment on what you really need to go deep on versus what you already have a working knowledge of. At the end of the day, the real test is how easily are you able to solve these lead code questions and on your own and come up with the solutions, right? So yeah, that's like the data structures and algorithms part of the coding. Now let's move on to problem solving, which is another part of coding interviews, right? So usually this is about a bit more than data structures. It's like, given a problem, can you map or convert this problem to a data structure or algorithm question, right? So it's not directly like, okay, given a graph, print all the nodes. It's more of like, it's actually going to be a real problem or a situation, like there are X number of gas stations on a map, blah blah blah, and you need to convert that or map that in your head to a data structure or algorithm question. And this is kind of very hard to learn, right? So this, as you do lead code questions from the previous section I mentioned, you'll get a hang of this. But make sure you're actually l- looking out for those patterns, right? Like what type of problems use what type of data structure. So look out for those patterns, because you'll notice there are some common patterns, right? Like usually if you're trying to find minimum or maximum, you might use some kind of dynamic programming or memoization. So things like that, like look out for those kind of common patterns. And an example of this is like, let's say there's a question on lead code that's evaluate reverse Polish notation, and it looks like this, where you're given a token um, array, which is supposed to be evaluated like this with parentheses. And I made a video on this question, which I'll link above. But basically, the idea is that you actually need to use a stack to solve this, right? So basically, every time you see an operator, you add or you perform that operation, put it in the stack, and then proceed that way, right? So it's not that intuitive, but like this is an example of like the problem solving skill, where you are taking this problem and solving it using a data structure algorithm, and then coding that data structure algorithm, right? So this is usually a pretty hard interview. So the next bucket after this is logical and maintainable. So it's basically more on like, can you produce code that's easy to read, easy to understand? And because when you're in software engineering, other people will be reading your code, right? So here, like, I think what will help is reading about like object oriented principles, design patterns, right? There's this thing called solid principles. Really understand deeply what each of those are, right? Because There's so much misconception, and I might make a video on this. If I do, I'll link it. But there's so much misconception on what these principles are, like single responsibility, open closed principle, Liskov substitution principle. So really understand these solid object oriented design principles, right, and how to use them. And also read about design patterns, right? So design patterns are highly underrated, but they provide a very good way to solve common problems and make your code extensible. And again, really understand applicability, right? Make sure you know, okay, for this problem, this is the design pattern to use. And for this problem, this is a design pattern to use. So when you read design patterns, read it from the lens of, given this problem, what's the best OO way to solve it? So design patterns provide you common patterns to solve problems that apply the OO principles properly, right? So that means when you're given an actual problem, you may not directly one use a pattern, but it will be a combination of those concepts and patterns that you apply to the specific problem, right? So really understand the OO principles, understand the design patterns, what type of problem they solve, and why that's the best pattern to solve that type of problem, right? And usually it depends on what you want to be able to easily change or add, as you maintain your code. So another thing you should read is the book on clean code, right? Because other than just structuring your classes and your objects properly in these type of interviews, interviewers usually look for, like, can you write code with good naming? Can you write code with small functions that are easy to read and modular, right? So read this book called Clean Code. It's a very good book by Robert Martin, bestseller. And yeah, this contains like all of the good stuff about writing, logical and maintainable code. So next bucket of interview you might encounter is more of technology specific, right? So like, let's say if you're interviewing for a specific position like React or Java, then you might be asked questions, or you might have an interview that kind of dive deep on your skill in that, language or competency, right? Like if it's Java, you might be asked like generics, concurrency, polymorphism. For C++, you might be asked like, what's a shared pointer, what's a struct versus a class, what's a smart pointer, things like that. So if the role you're applying for is technology specific, then you'll need to kind of brush up on key concepts on your specific technology, right? And sometimes this also involves like actually writing code in this technology, where the focus is not a lot on data structures or problem solving, but more of like, can you use this technology to write a working software, debug, fix the bugs, and like actually make something working, right? So make sure you know how to hands-on use this thing. And read books, articles to go deep on these technologies and this the frameworks that you're going to specialize in. And look up common interview questions, right? So that you can identify, okay, what are the topics I need to learn about? Like for C++, like struct versus class is a common question. Um, and then you can use that and go deeper on the differences, right? In Java, like polymorphism, inheritance, interfaces, generics, these are common questions. So then you can pick that topic, read article, go deep on that, make sure you understand each different piece and how it works so that you can easily answer questions, right? And yeah, and then obviously use these common interview questions to practice. So yeah, just look up online on your specific technology and then also do some hands-on work just to make sure you can work with that technology really well. So yeah, that concludes our basically walkthrough of bucket one. If you have any questions on this so far, leave them in the comments. I'll be happy to answer any questions in the comments. And if you're enjoying this video, like, subscribe. It'll really help my channel. So yeah, let's go to the second bucket, which is now design, right? And so the first thing in design is OO design. And this is usually a focus area for more junior, maybe mid-level engineers sometimes. And usually this involves a class diagram to solve a certain type of problem, right? So, like you might be asked, okay, given like a tic-tac-toe or parking lot, like just give me the classes that you will have and how they will interact. And so, what you'll need to be successful in this kind of interview is obviously OO design principles, the same thing I mentioned before, design patterns, right? So that you know what are good ways to break up things. And obviously practice this on common questions. There's a lot of common questions you can look up online on OO design, like tic-tac-toe, parking lot, and there can be different ways or variations of these problems, right? So really, when you're in the interview, make sure you understand and clarify requirements of like what exactly the functionality should be, what you're including as a functionality and what's not included, right? What are the different ways that this can change, or where you want it to be flexible, right? And once you come up with a class diagram, you may be asked to code part of your design. So they may say, okay, like once you have these different classes, then you pick one of the class, and or they'll tell you, okay, can you write this function in this class, right? So be sure you know how to think of a problem from a design standpoint and then write the code, right? Not just jump directly into the code. So yeah, the other bucket of design questions is usually around distributed systems. So this is usually for more senior engineers, especially if you're going for some kind of infrastructure role, like in a database system team or like an infrastructure management team. But also this knowledge here will be the foundation for other system design interviews, right? So the best book here is, I think, Designing Data Intensive Applications. Read that book, keep watching videos on distributed systems till you get the hang of the different concepts. And at the very basic level, like understand the ins and out of how to scale a web server and how to scale a database, right? Once you understand those two concepts, I think that sets the foundation for a lot of different things, right? Like understand really from the bottom up, like start with a single server, what you run into, how to scale, how to improve until you come up with a whole scalable web architecture. And similarly for a database, right? Like hot partitions and then scaling that up and so on. And obviously understand here that there is no cookie cutter solution. There's no such thing. It's always about trade offs and making choices based on the requirements, right? So usually you'll be met, okay, you can do this, but that sacrifices XYZ. Or you can do B, but that sacrifices, DEF. So really understand that it's always about trade offs. And the trade offs that you can and cannot make are dependent on the question and the requirement and the product, right? So, in some systems, you need things to be really real time, but it's okay if you lose one or two data, right? But in some other systems, you cannot afford to lose any data, but then it's okay if you're not real time, right? So then you can make different choices based on that. So really, when you learn about these, how to scale a web server and a database, which is also covered in this book, by the way, really understand the trade-offs and the choices, right? Like, okay, to go from this point to a more scalable point, I can do X, but that sacrifices ABC, or I can do Y and that sacrifices DEF. And once you understand this, then when you are faced with a question, that's where clarifying questions come in, because you really need, the intent of clarifying questions should be to understand obviously the requirements, but also try to map those requirements to inputs to your trade-off decisions, right? And then that you can use to make, to provide it as a reason on why you're making those decisions, right? So for example, if you are making a trade-off on real timeness, and that's okay because in your requirements you have ABC, which means that it doesn't need to be real time, and that's why I'm choosing option A, right? So that really completes the loop on, it shows that you understand trade-offs, it shows that you can pick the requirements from the question and map them to the trade-offs and pick the decision that way, right? So the most important thing in distributed systems is understanding trade-offs and why a certain solution is fit for a certain problem. And that's the key thing. And obviously drive the discussion. So if, especially if you're going for more senior roles, you're expected to be proactive and know what are the different parts of the system. If you're at a mid-level role, then maybe this one you can do a bit without because they'll guide you and you just need to answer, demonstrate understanding of design. But when you're going for more senior staff level, you really need to drive the discussion and be proactive. So, yeah, common concepts in distributed systems, obviously, like the CAP theorem, consensus, consistent hashing, data partitioning, like, different caching strategies, and so on. So, there's a lot of things, concepts here, but yeah, just read these books and other materials until you get a hang of it. And yeah, really understand trade offs. I think that's the key thing here. So, next type of interview is usually like product system design. And this is obviously whatever I said in the previous slide still applies. And this is a focus area more for senior engineers, right? So, usually this type of question is like, given a product, you have to design it from scratch. Like, for example, design YouTube or design a streaming service. And again, even for this one, clarifying questions are very important, right? So if you're given an ambiguous problem like design a streaming service, that can be really big and huge and ambiguous. What you need to do is really ask clarifying questions and scope it down to what you need to be able to fit within the interview, right? And yeah, some books I recommend here: System Design Interview V1 and V2. These are very, very good books. I read these. It provides you common questions and like a really nice framework on like understanding the requirements, making trade-offs, and coming up with a solution, right? So really read this book. It's very good. Understand also functional and non-functional requirements. So what the system should be able to do and how it should perform, because sometimes you don't really need a scalable solution if you don't have that much scale, right? So sometimes a single host does just fine. So really understand the requirements, because again, there's no cookie cutter solution. So understand the requirements and build the simplest solution that meets the requirements, right? And obviously the same thing, provide reasoning behind your decisions. Even if it's a very simple decision like I'm going to use S3, provide a reason. So when you prepare, make sure you understand, like, any interview you prepare for, make sure you understand, like, okay, if you see that, oh, for we are designing a streaming service and here we're going to use CDN and we're going to use CloudFront as a CDN. Okay, so why, right? Make sure you understand why. Like, why is this needed? Why is it necessary? Like, what requirement do we have that necessitates this? So that when you're faced with an interview, you can then make the right decisions based on the requirements, right? Not based on some previous solution you saw to a problem which had different requirements. So again, it's very important to map everything to the requirements and provide decisions. And so yeah, common questions here are usually like streaming service, reservation service, like data aggregation pipelines, like counting views, aggregating ad clicks, and so on. So yeah, read these books. These have usually covered most of the common questions. So next is another type of interview that I've encountered is reverse system design. And here what they do is, again, it's also for more senior engineers, but here what they do is they ask you to present or explain a system you previously built or worked on, right? So you summarize the architecture that you worked on or you built. And here you really need to focus on what you did. Like, if there was an existing architecture and you built on top of that, explain that. Or if there's something you built from scratch, provide that. And really what you want to focus on here is like decisions that you took, right? Key decisions, alternatives that you evaluated and why you didn't choose them, like the trade-offs that you took to pick the decision and why you picked that, right? Because again, mapping it back to the requirements that you had. And then maybe some technology choices, right? Like you chose Java or Python, why did you choose them? And constraints you were operating under, right? Because this is very important. Like, in some companies, the business needs you to like deliver quickly because maybe it's a new product and you want to get to market quicker, learn from the customers and iterate. So then maybe you're because of that constraint you favored to reuse solutions instead of building your own, even if it was less optimal, right? So really present those constraints because they will help justify your decisions, right? And if you without those constraints, you might look like you made stupid decisions. So really present the decisions, the decision making framework, constraints, trade offs, and all those things, right? So this is this will help. This is a bit easier interview because you're very familiar with the architecture. So the best job you need to do in preparing for this is just structurally, like, mapping out the architectures you worked on and decisions you took, trade-offs, pros and cons, why you took them, constraints, right? So just take time to write down and summarize that, so when this interview comes you can easily present it. So next is the third and final bucket, which is behavior and leadership. So this has a wide range of topics as well, and we'll go through them one by one. So first is work ethic, right? So in work ethic, what they're looking for usually is like, can you own problems and independently deliver them, right? Are you able to learn new things? Are you able to work and collaborate with your customers and stakeholders? Are you receptive to feedback, and can you take feedback and improve, right? So again, regardless of the level you're in, this applies. Even if you're like a very fresh graduate, what you want to do is try to demonstrate these qualities from the work you did in school, or maybe an internship or something, and prepare stories how you demonstrate these, right? Like outline the situation, the action that you took that demonstrates these things, and the result, right? And then depending on the specific company, like these behaviors or qualities might be said differently or done differently. Like for Amazon, we have leadership principles, right? These leadership principles actually, convey how you should behave, right? And what your work ethic should be. Um, in Google, they have googliness, right, which has a different set of values that they align. So it's usually tied to the company culture, and then depending on which company you're going for, like tune these stories to demonstrate these or clearly demonstrate these principles, right? So again, don't make up stories, but you can always tune the stories to highlight the aspects that they're looking for. So understand, what the company values and try to find examples that fit under that. The next thing is scope and influence. Again, it's more for mid-level to senior engineers. And what you want to do here is in your stories, where even if it's about the previous one, work ethic, right, or any of the future buckets that I'm going to talk about, uh, or future topics I'm going to talk about in this bucket, what you want to do is demonstrate your scope, right? So if you're a mid-level engineer, you want to demonstrate how you operated, influencing across your team. You put in best practices, you led mechanisms for your team, you improved your team's operational excellence. If you are going for a more senior engineering role, then maybe you want to demonstrate your influence across multiple teams, architecture, right? And if you're going for like a principal or staff, then you want to show how you influence multiple organizations, right? So in each of your stories, make sure that you're telling the story or the situations are demonstrating your scope. Don't try to use situations that are smaller in scope, because that won't the behavior is also tied to the leveling, right? So maybe you're very good at this certain behavior within your team, but not at an organization level, right? So again, you need to demonstrate your scope in these stories. And one template that you can use, especially if you're more senior, like it's more of an augmentation to that star format. It's basically clarify your role, right? So before you tell the problem or situation, clarify, okay, like I was the team lead for 5 teams and I was responsible for XYZ. So this like sets you up for a certain position and sets the stage that okay, this was your role. Then describe the problem or the situation, like what what was the problem and what did you have to do, and then describe the framework on how you what kind of framework you use to approach this problem, because this will show that not only you can solve this problem, but if any other similar problem comes up, it shows how you approach it, right? So demonstrate your framework. Okay, like since this was a XYZ type of problem, my usual approach to this is to do A, B, and C. And so as part of A, here's what I did specifically for the situation, and that becomes your action. And then as part of B, here's what I did, and so on, right? And so this really demonstrates that um, you have a framework, and that demonstrates more maturity and seniority, and that you can repeat this behavior. And then obviously talk about results, like okay, now that you did these actions and frameworks, what were the results, and never leave out learnings, right? So always when you tell a result, say here's what happened, and it's usually never perfect, right? So don't try to make it like that. So always demonstrate the results and say, hey, here are the things that I could have done better. And maybe even to raise the bar, close the loop, saying, okay, I learned from this that I could have done XYZ better. And in fact, in the next project, when I did ABC, I applied this learning and I found that it was better. So really showing that you are taking the learning and applying them and continuously improving, right? So also write them down and say them out loud, right? So when you're preparing for these, you should write down all your stories and uh, uh, on these common questions. So there's usually a common set of questions, and you can reuse stories, but usually you would have worked on 3 or 4 key projects, and there would have been some key situations that you can write about, right? And you can always tune the story based on the specific questions. That's what I do, right? So write all of these stories down. Some common questions are like, okay, tell me about your most successful project, tell me about the last successful project you had, or how do you divide project among team members, how do you support your team when working on a project. So these are all similar type of questions which you can use the same story, right? But you can just highlight different parts. So you can talk about your project, like your scope, your influence, what the problem was, what you did, how you broke it down, and how you delivered, right? So really prepare and write down these like stories in this format so that you can use the same stories for different questions. The next thing is ambiguity, and again, this is more for mid-level to senior engineers. So you want to demonstrate how you handled ambiguous problems, how you brought clarity to the requirements, right? Sometimes it's like even the leadership or the business doesn't exactly know what they want. They're like, okay, we want this, but really they don't want this. They want them underlying that, and there's other ways to get that, right? So really how you brought clarity or disambiguated a problem, and sometimes you don't have the answers, right? So like in instances, think about situations where you took a problem and tapped into knowledge of others and brought clarity to the problem, right? So, and this maybe is even more for senior engineers, but again, you want to use the same framework, right? uh, and common questions are like, okay, tell me about a time you delivered a project through collaboration when you didn't have all the answers, right? So really this focuses on collaboration, communicating with stakeholders, and bringing clarity and delivering on problems, right? So yeah, prepare again some stories on this, write them down in this format, right? And that will help you, prepare for this type of questions. The next piece in this bucket is conflict resolution. So again, this is more for mid-level or senior engineers. So sometimes we have conflicts with our team members, or conflicts in the sense that you have a different opinion on how to solve a problem and your team has a different opinion. So, how do you resolve that difference in opinion? By making sure that you're both bought into what you're doing, right? So, you don't try to use authority or strong arm people to believe what your opinion is, right? But you basically use empathy. You understand the root of like why the contention is occurring, or where's the disconnect, because there's usually like some things that you all agree on, right? Like there's usually some, okay, we need to make XYZ for our customers. There's usually something that you're usually aligned on. But then when you're looking at some proposal or some options, you're seeing it differently. And you still have a common understanding. So really getting to the root of like where actually you're disconnected, because it might not be just on, oh, he thinks client side is better and I think server side is better. But you know that, you know, underlying, you both have the same values of what's important for the team or for the customer. And so then you work from there and see like where you're actually disconnected, right? So, really working with your peers, or even if it's one-on-one, on understanding where the contention is, resolving that, proposing alternatives, right? So uh, re- that's what you want to do when you resolve conflicts. And again, same template here. This template works really well. And common questions here are like, tell me when you resolved a conflict between your team and another team, right? Because they had different priorities, you had different priorities, so how did you bridge the gap? And sometimes like how opposing views yielded a positive result, because sometimes when your team member has a different opinion and you have a different opinion, sometimes both of you are missing some pieces, and when you combine your thoughts and ideas and resolve it professionally, you actually end up with a solution that's even better than both of the original solutions, right? So think about these situations again, write them down, prepare for these so that you can reuse these stories when you give your interviews. The next bucket is empathy. So again, this is more for more senior engineers, and this is more about mentoring, understanding people's point of view. Um, when you're a team leader or organization leader, you might have instances where someone is not feeling included. So what do you do to foster inclusion, collaboration, making sure people are not feeling left out, and helping new people get into the team and blend into the team, giving recognition and things like that. So yeah, really taking the empathetic lens to make the experience for your peers, for people below you, more valuable. And obviously, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a big thing here. Like, how do you not discriminate against, different types of people, and making sure they're all feeling included, right? So you can read up a bit more on this, prepare some stories where you demonstrated this, right? And really focus on how you identified that there's no inclusion, so that will show your empathy, and then what you did to resolve it, and obviously learnings, right? What you could do to do it better, right? And focus on mechanisms and frameworks, right? Like again, that template which I presented earlier, like focus on frameworks, on like how do you identify, right? Like I talk to them one on one, I try to understand their point of view, blah blah blah. So, and then you synthesize that. Maybe if there are multiple people involved, you talk to each one of them one on one, and synthesize and move from there. So yeah, focus on those type of things. So that concludes basically the step one, which is getting the lay of the land. Don't misinterpret step one as you have to go through and review all of those topics, right? No, step one is just mapping out, okay, here are all the things I need to do. It's not necessarily doing them yet, right? Because doing them will be a long process. So once you've mapped out everything that you need to do and things that you need to focus on based on your specific career or types of job you're looking for, the next step is you want to schedule multiple interviews, right? Not just one, but multiple, because this will help you practice and understand how to perform in the interview situation. It'll help you learn from mistakes. And don't be discouraged if you don't get an offer, because that's the point of multiple interviews. Like, you want to retrospect, take the learnings, and continuously improve. And the interviews that you really want, like let's say you really want the job at Google or at Amazon or at Uber, for example, save those ones for the end, right? Because you want to practice on the ones that you're okay with letting go in the start, right? And because you'll learn a lot from actually doing a real interview. So prioritize that. And once you actually get an interview, be it a practice interview or maybe a interview that you really want to land, um, what I want you to do is, once you've mapped out your lay of the land, prioritize what you want to start working on, right? Maybe you are very good with data structures and you want to focus more on problem solving, or maybe the interviews you're trying to do doesn't ask for logical and maintainable and focuses more on technology specific, right? So really ask your recruiter, right? Like, what's the interview structure going to be like, right? What topics will we cover? What topics will we not cover? um, and what each interview will be about. Companies usually give out this information. So based on that, you can prepare properly. And then also look up online forums, right? So there's a lot of information online when you try to interview for a company, like what they ask for. So that way you can narrow down and prioritize, what you want to prepare for first. So, with that, let me just close with some bonus tips, right? So, these tips are really going to help you throughout your journey. And so, the first one is like, don't spend too much time preparing upfront. Like, don't spend 10 months or 5 months preparing and then scheduling interviews. And then, so don't do that. Like, be very iterative, right? Like, schedule interviews, do mock interviews, but study a little bit and then do a real interview, because the real interview will help you learn so much more and will help you tune your preparation to that experience. So the experience of an actual interview is very valuable. So again, schedule multiple interviews, do mock interviews, but don't over index on preparation, because no amount of preparation can exceed an actual interview experience, right? Because there's the experience of being in that situation is way more valuable. So, you know, focus on getting actual experience, and then combining that with actually your preparation. So that will be more optimal. And go for domains or companies that you actually care or are actually passionate about, because this will keep you excited, this will keep you motivated and like do well. And like, if you are, let's say if you're passionate about food or you're passionate about, yeah, your food, so then you might want to consider going to DoorDash or Uber Eats. And then when you interview with them or they ask you questions or designs, you can actually relate very well to the customer experience, and you can actually like combine your actual passion and your skills to give up the best performance, right? So if if you have some areas or domains that you're passionate about or you care deeply about, that motivation is really going to help you. That extra kick is going to help you prepare well and perform better. So if you have such companies or domains, stick to those. Next is, everyone gets nervous, right? but try to, not let that get too much in the way, and go with a mindset to enjoy and have fun, right? And especially don't cram last minute. Like if you have an interview at 11 a.m., wake up in the morning, do your exercise, brush your teeth, and just go into the interview. Don't try to cram last minute, right? Like do all of that the day before, and then on the interview, go with a calm and relaxed mind is going to do you so much better in the actual interview, because if you're stressed, that's going to work against you. Even if you know everything, even if you have very skilled, the stress is going to work against you. So just be very relaxed and calm on the day of. And relaxing and having fun, I think, is the most important tip. Like interviews can be fun. Like you're solving a coding problem, you're solving a design, and you're talking about your experience. So it can be very fun and exciting. And just relax, have fun. Obviously, do your homework, prepare, get your foundation set. But on the day of, just take it easy, be confident, relax, and just have fun enjoy the process, right? So, I think that's the most important tip for me, to perform well on the interview, is just the state of mind. Because no matter if you prepare for how much you prepare and how much lead code questions you solved, if you're not in a good state of mind on that day, nothing's nothing else is gonna matter. So yeah, just if you want to give your best, this is very important. um, so yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, if you have any other questions, comments, suggestions, leave them in the comment section. Please like this video if you liked it, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Cheers.